of things to tell you today. I'm a minute late. That drives me crazy. I like to be on time. And I haven't always achieved that, but I always work on it. But I'll tell you exactly what happened. It's 10:01 right now, but at 9:51, I said, man, I need another coffee. Um, and I went in the house and I made this instant coffee. I don't mind instant coffee. Sorry that it's kind of worn out a bit there. It says, this is a quote from Thomas Edison. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. I guess I'm in good hands. It doesn't always work for me either, and I know it doesn't always work for you. And you look for your failures, and you learn a lot more from your failures if you take the lessons that they give you than you learn from your successes. But most people kind of give up and don't continue to learn. I got to live to 120 to learn all the lessons that I still need to learn in life. And I hope that keep struggling, trying to fail forward and fail as fast as I can so that I can get towards the successes that, in fact, it'll be of use to some of you. So I go in the house, I get my coffee, I come running back here, and I have to start the timer, and the timer was a minute late. I missed it by a minute. I know you don't care, but I care. Not because it matters in the grand scheme of things, but it matters as a record of personal action and discipline for me that I hope to carry on. And I'm slowing down. That's why I got here late. But, back in the day, with a Christian colleague, friend of mine, we agreed together to do what wasn't called a podcast back then. Well, the word might have been invented, but it wasn't in the common vernacular. And we did something on what was called BlogTalkRadio. And actually, if you look it up, those episodes, I don't know how many, a couple hundred of them probably, are still there. And we had, on a good day, 500 listens. I don't know that they listened to the whole program, which was about an hour long, where I asked questions and my colleague gave thoughtful answers to those questions more often than I came up with the content myself. But it was something we did to make a difference in people's lives. And he just told me this week that he still gets people saying how much they've appreciated that broadcast back in the day. And I hope that someday somebody will appreciate this. And if they come back and say, thank you, I'm happy for that. But if they don't, it doesn't matter, because I'm still, well, it matters, but it doesn't make a difference as to whether I'm going to continue to do this or not, because I know that the Bible teaches me that my labor in the Lord is not in vain. So as I'm coming back from the house to what we call the barn, this is an outbuilding. I don't know how to describe it to you, but it's a barn-shaped place where a garage would normally be, but you can't put a car in it. And I see this new garbage truck coming down, picking up our recycling today. And it's a lime green kind of a color. It's quite an impressive truck, bigger than the old truck. And it says Green for Life on it. Now, isn't that special? Garbage, recycling garbage, Green for Life. Now, somebody in that company thought that would be a good tagline for them, and against it. In fact, it looks pretty good to me. I don't know where the recycling stuff goes. I don't know how it gets recycled. I don't even know if it ends up in a landfill site. I just know it goes to the end of my driveway and it's gone. But to me, it's a kind of an illustration. It's easy to come up with something to put on a coffee mug. It's easy to do a lot of things that are aspirational, that don't actually evidence themselves in life. And I'm very concerned that as we try to work through helping you develop breakthrough pathways in life, that you will develop your own set of standards and disciplines for life that make a difference in a few people. Because if everybody makes a difference in a few, it'll make a difference in the world, and yet we don't. So today we're going to actually getting back on track here the last couple of weeks. I've been sort of going off on my own little bunny trail, reading Coleman's book. But I'm coming back to what springboarded me into this, and I'm going to give you more of Coleman today than of Carter. And I think he had a lot of really good things to say. The chapter is just simply association. How did Jesus train up the 12? The first line of his book was, men were his method. You know, I like that line because that doesn't make any sense. It's like a restaurant saying quality is our recipe. We try to build quality, whatever. But I think you kind of get the message. He working with men was the way Jesus developed things, and he associated himself with them. So I'm going to point you in the direction that Coleman doesn't. But I think it's really critical that we understand Jesus. There's been research done on what Jesus is like, and there's one Barna thing I read recently, which isn't all that. It had 20 standards to say for like Jesus, and I thought, none of them pointed to this point that Coleman makes, which is supported by Scripture. By the way, Coleman quotes in his short book, not shorter than the books that I write. It could be more succinct. He quotes 444 different, I think that's the number, different Bible verses. So it's saturated with Scripture, and he wraps his thoughts around them. And one of the things that he delves in deeply, second chapter in the book, is this business of Jesus associated with a few number of people. And I don't think that when we say, I want to be like Jesus, that we really grasp what that means and live it out. But let's move on a little bit. So I'm saying, yeah, I'm back on campus today. Well, sort of. I can't help myself. I always go beyond what Coleman has said. I'm not here to regurgitate his stuff, but I'm here to build with it, alongside of it, and perhaps in some cases upon it. But here's some things that you need to grasp as we move forward today on the hidden systems. 97% of evangelical leaders say following the teachings of Christ is essential to being a good evangelical. Now, the question behind this has the wrong idea. The teachings of Christ. No, it's not just the teachings, which of course he did say many things, and he said we're to pass on all of the things that he's commanded. But the actions, the example of Christ is what we are to follow. What did Jesus do? Could you imagine Jesus today spending 20 hours sitting behind his computer screen developing a presentation for a sermon on Sunday morning? I can't even begin to imagine that. And yet that's what most people who are employed to be like Jesus and to teach like Jesus, 95.7% of them say, yeah, that's important. But they spend way too much time on preparing presentations. There's no evidence, none that I can find, that tells you that Jesus prepared what he was going to say. Now, obviously, he was prepared to say what he was going to say. And the only Bible verse anybody quotes to me is study proved a workman who doesn't need to be ashamed. It doesn't say a preacher. It says a workman to be ashamed. So if you study, you have to study the patterns of Jesus' life and try to replicate it. People want 89% to promote biblical truth, but I think we miss it because we don't pick up on the hidden systems. The desire level to do it right is way up there. But the actual consistent practice, even as defined by them, being the Jesus who showed compassion and forgiveness and all those characteristics, and I don't mean to belittle them, the action doesn't match it. And there's reasons why, and that's because we fail to understand the hidden systems. 17% of practicing Christians say they meet regularly with a spiritual mentor. 17%, 1 out of 5. They don't have a spiritual mentor, 4 out of 5 Christians. But 2/3 of them say they want someone to walk alongside of them spiritually, someone they can share their issues with, whatever those issues are. James uses this phrase, confess your faults one to another. I'm not sure that he's saying confess the events, but he's saying the things you're struggling with, how do you deal with it? I'm finishing up a book. I hope to get it done this week, but sometimes I don't meet my own objectives. Entitled I meant to. I still mean to. Still mean to get around to doing something. And most people recognize that there's reasons why they don't get to do what they intended to do that go beyond the normal capacities of life, like, over-expecting and other things. And there's forces that are at work in our life, that 37 of them that I've identified by secular psychological research, that come to play as to why people don't do what they mean to do. So here we've got people who say, I don't have anybody, and people who say, I want someone. And this is the desire and the gap between the desire and the lived experience. So if we think about what Jesus actually did, we have the example. When he taught by what he did as much, or even more, I would argue, than what he said. So what did he do? Mark 3, it explains that sometime into his ministry, he's amassed some disciples, starting from the original 5. And John records that. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't. But that group grew, and he's got this group of disciples. And Jesus prayerfully considers which of this group of disciples, I'm going to say there's 70, because later on in the Gospels we have 70, but a lot of people. And he selects from them the people that he's going to work with on a close basis. That's the hidden system that churches don't understand. People get all haughty about the fact that you didn't visit my mother-in-law in the hospital and she was sick. And the pastor didn't even know the mother-in-law was in the hospital, but somehow he's supposed to be omniscient and know all these things. And his job, by the minds of some of the people in the church, is to be their advocate and go and kind of sprinkle holy water on ground. Pray with her and minister to her. And so many pastors burn themselves out trying to be all things to all people. And because they care, they feel badly that they feel guilty that they didn't know about grandma and they didn't visit the mother-in-law in the hospital. And so they say, I'm so sorry, I'll try to do better next time. Jesus didn't operate that way. He stayed with his, in modern terms, elders board, deacons board, leadership team or whatever. That's where he poured his life. And by all means, he was out there with going straight to the marketplace, straight to the people. To one of my faves is the woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, coming and touching the hem of his garment. I'm fascinated by that. She came to him, he was available to her, and she was healed. But it wasn't as much about the healing of the woman as it was about being the example to the people who were following him, in particular, the 12 closest associates. There was no classroom. The classroom was the street. I talked with a couple of pastors in this past couple of weeks who I said, what do you want to do? And one guy said, I want to teach in Bible college. Another guy said, well, when I was young, I wanted to mentor young people. And I said, well, you still can. Both these guys are approaching what we would think of as retirement age. I don't agree with that concept of retiring. I don't have a problem with retiring from the paycheck, retiring from, as I say, the brass nameplate on the door. That's okay with me. But retiring from ministry, I don't get it as long as I'm breathing. I'm going to do what I can do, as failing as it is, to be all that I can be to help raise up others. And I said to these guys, well, you don't have to have an official title to be able to do that. And they both said, well, that's true. They agree it's true psychologically, but they haven't anointed themselves as the leader. Now others will recognize and have historically recognized these two men at quite some high level, but they have to anoint themselves for the people who will go out there and do what needs to happen, not just taking the funerals because the local funeral home is looking for a preacher to take the funerals. Not a bad idea. But they will find some people like Jesus found with the hidden system and invest in those people, not in a classroom, although there are some times when, the mentor will do most of the talking, but live life with those disciples like Jesus did. His presence with them was the curriculum far more than the words that he said to them. Hope you're grasping. Just being with them. Now, being with them is important. Well, we'll talk about that at the end, I suppose. You can put bookmark. I got to remember that. There was a formal system that was the normal way that people raised people up, like in the scribes situation, but that's not what Jesus did. He relied on his presence with the disciples. In the Chosen, which I really recommend that you watch the seasons, there's one controversial episode where they have Jesus playing a game with the other disciples. So did Jesus play games? Well, there's thing. He was living with them, and people play games. So, I'm in on them doing that, but that jarred some people to think of, because they want to think of Jesus as standing in front of the crowd and speaking to people, of Jesus reaching down and healing somebody and always being the successful center of attention. And there's a pretty good chance, I can't prove it, that Jesus allowed himself to just be in the games of life with other people. He relied on his presence with these people, but also the words shared in the presence. The disciples walked with Jesus somewhere over 2,000 miles, probably closer to 3,000 miles, that they walked together in the 2.5 up to 3 years that they were with him. And that means that they were walking with him a couple of hours a day. Now, there's something special about walking, and perhaps I'll pull that together because there's some research about this, not just in terms of the aerobic capacity of your heart, but when you walk with somebody, you're facing forward, the ambience is all changing. Walk in concrete jungles if you have the opportunity where it's angular. Your physiology relates better to being out in nature. So get out there by water, down through the woods, with the tall trees, whatever it is. It's, as I'm recording this today, it's springtime, and this is a beautiful time to get out there and go walking with somebody. By all means, go walk with your spouse. Hold hands, I don't care how old you are. Stay joined together as you walk and as you talk. You don't necessarily have to have a lot of deep conversations, but when you're walking with someone, bear in mind that it is your job, it's your responsibility to bring spiritual subject into the conversation. You don't need to just talk about your favorite sports teams. I'm not complaining about you talking about that. You don't need to complain about the news and wars and rumors of wars, which Jesus promised. Well, I was going to have wars to talk about. But find the way to tie these things in to the things that Jesus wanted to build into your life and into your friend's life. They learned by walking with him, eyes forward, ears on each other's voices. And what happened was the message that he was teaching was much better caught than taught. So to know him was to be with him. Did Jesus have a sense of humor? I don't see a whole lot of evidence of that New Testament record, but I do see some sarcasm in there and some irritation in what Jesus said and how he lived with people. He was superhuman, to be sure, but he was not unhuman. He was like the rest of us. I'm sure that if you cut him, he'd bleed too, just like you and I do. But Jesus says, "I'm the way, I'm the road. Just follow me, be like me, follow my example." And they saw this truth of who Jesus was as they were walking with him. So Jesus invited, particularly in a couple of events we have where Jesus says, "Come and see where I'm staying." Now, he didn't have a home in the permanent sense. He also tells us that. But he let people come and stay with him in the tent, the private lodging or the public lodging, maybe rented bed and breakfast type thing. We're not sure about all of that. But where he was going, what he was doing, as he was eating meals with them, that kind of interaction was much more what Jesus did to raise up his disciples than what we think. I'm using a PowerPoint presentation. I'm making a one-to-many presentation, even as we speak. So obviously, there's a place for that, but that was not the emphasis. The Master's School was taking the responsibility of saying, I'm in charge here of not dominating people, but of helping guide the agenda. And Jesus answered questions in real time. He often deflected from the question and gave them a story. He often asked a question in response to the question that was being asked of him. But that's how we did it. He didn't do it in an organized way like the presence we have when we set ourselves up. And our whole lifetime we've done this. We got this wooden thing that I don't know, the technical name is podium. I'm not sure if that's the platform or the lectern and the words. We call it the pulpit. And they used to have these things, they'd climb upstairs and they'd be way up there looking down upon the people. None of that comes from our understanding of the New Testament. Now, some of that woodwork is pretty special. And it's kind of nice, but Jesus was in constant association in ordinary circumstances. Would Jesus have worn a robe in the pulpit or any kind of special vestments like a three-piece suit or a suit and tie? I don't think so. I think that he would dress more or less like ordinary people. Now, we do know because his dress was a little different than at the time of the crucifixion. He had this one-piece garment that somebody apparently had made for him. So his dress probably was maybe a cut above the ordinary. I think that's something to bear in mind. That don't be so ordinary in the way you dress if you're leading others, that you look like you're kind of slovenly, but be at the top of the scale of what's normal in whatever the society is. And so people do know that while you're normal, you're also distinct. The clothes make the man. Not really. But they do make a difference to people. As time goes by, we find toward the Gospel of John in particular, the Gospels spend an inordinate amount of time. Inordinate, that's not a really good word. An exceptional amount of time on the last week of Jesus' life. Yeah, between a third and a half of the Gospels talk about those events. And many of those events are centered around not the other people, but about the 12 that he's working with, even to the point where Judas is right into the very last minute, as it were. He goes out and betrays the Lord at what we call the Last Supper. Jesus wasn't saying, I got to go and give one more sermon to the masses. No, he was concentrating on the people that he intended would pass on the blessing of the gospel to others. As his death approached more and more, and his opposition increased more and more, Jesus invested in the disciples. We have in John 18, this passage where Jesus goes over to what is in that passage called the olive grove, where it says he often went there with his disciples. That was really interesting because he was spending an average of 2 hours a day walking, roughly. And he often went with his disciples to this particular place that we know as the Garden of Gethsemane, to meet with his disciples, to chat. You can't imagine that he set up the projector and said, okay, today's lesson is number 13. He went with the flow of things, and the time they spent together was all done to prepare them for this tremendous loss. You know what John records for us, I hope you do, in the upper room discourse. And he says, when I go, that there's going to be a helper come, and he's going to lead you into all the truth and so on. And after the resurrection, he doesn't speak, he doesn't show up ever in the public, except that on occasion, as Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians, he appeared to over 500 people at one time, demonstrating the reality of his resurrection. But the preponderance of evidence was that he was investing in the fishermen. He's at the Sea of Galilee, boiling fish for them. And there, early in the morning, he's out there with them. That's very important that we grasp that that's how Jesus dealt with life. His ministry was revolving around those individuals. Now, there's always a need for care, and he demonstrates care over and over again, as you know, with many incidents and healing people and meeting people in the way, and sometimes being direct with them, and sometimes he never used a script. It was always on in a flow, and more often than not, the others were observing how Jesus handled the situation. That was how he trained them. He trained them by being a living example that they would replicate. And we see in the book of Acts that some of that happens. And Peter and John, and then on their way up to the temple, and the beggar is there and needs healing. And they say, hey, I don't have any money, but this is what I got for you. And they knew they could pass on the spiritual value, and in this case, the healing value that had been given to them. But what we've got is this expectation that it would multiply through the 11 who are left, and maybe the 12 when you had the one that was elected afterwards. And we see that all of these people had a responsibility. They didn't say, oh, look to him. They knew what their role was to be, to contribute in the other people's lives. 1 out of 5 say they got somebody who's contributing in their life, and you don't know. If you're normal because you know your own propensities to sin and to failure, when somebody says you're my mentor, you go, whoa, and it sets a really high bar for you. Yeah, I know that feeling. And I accept the term, but kind of begrudgingly, that I've mentored a lot of people in my life and expect to be a lot more before the Lord takes me home. And it's not, okay, here's the formal relationship. But what that research indicated that we talked about at the beginning was meeting with somebody weekly. And what that means is regularly. And I think the 1 day in 7, setting aside that meeting is really important. Jesus has passed on, by associating with his disciples, he's passed on an example that we should follow in his steps and equip other people. Now, what that means is that preaching to the crowd isn't going to do it. It's not going to raise up leaders. You can't do this in a classroom. You got to do it out there on the street. You got to get out from behind your desk and get out there and actually spend some time with people. Yeah, they can come to your office, but take them out to a park. Go golfing. That's a 4-hour event. You gave up on a long time ago. But get out there on a golf course or whatever it is. Maybe even just say, I'm going to Walmart to pick up a few things. Do you want to come along? And do something of that nature. Make the integration of your life at which leads the other person. And so when you're in that Walmart and somebody says, can I help you? Then you say, yeah. And the way you relate to that person in Walmart is being an example to the person who is with you, treating them with respect, perhaps a touch of humor, an interest in their life. And you don't say, no, I'm just looking, thanks. You actually become a human, a real human with other people. And the person with you may go, this is unusual to me. I'm feeling a little awkward about this. That's where they start because they haven't done it before. But they'll find out that the other person isn't going to bite and is actually going to be lifted up a little bit. You got to do what other people need to have done with them. Now, the Navigator is a wonderful organization started by Dawson Trotman back in the day. He has a famous audio. You can hear it online, and I would really encourage you to go and listen to this story. Born to Reproduce is the thing you're looking for. Dawson Trotman, Born to Reproduce. You'll hear it. It's an audio file from the 1950s. His main thing is, where is your man? Now, that's not politically correct today. We'd have to say, where is your person, which doesn't seem to work. Where's your man? Where's your woman? Where's your person? That in his view was you led to the Lord and you led them on to walk with the Lord. Well, if you didn't lead them to the Lord, there's still lots of people who came to the Lord, maybe through their family or in other ways, that need you. They need you. When we've got a 13-week class and it comes and goes, it doesn't get the job done in people's lives. It may get them started. It's not such a bad idea to have a newcomers class. But you've got to have somebody who, I like the word, sponsors them, and where they know that that's the person that I can turn to because they've already accepted this relationship with me. If we just stick on, we've got this program for that, or you can see this video online or whatever, it's not going to get it done. Things that are too mechanized are too mechanized. Jesus invested 3 years intensively with these 12 guys. And even at that, he only got 11 out of 12. So it shouldn't surprise you when you get 50-50 and people don't pick it up. And it will take not 13 weeks. It's not a curriculum. The curriculum is life, and life is the curriculum. When you follow up with people, you share your own life. You share your own faults, your propensities, not in such a way that they get to publish them on their blog, in a blog post. And you've got to be sensitive about not going too far, but you let them know that you too have struggles in life. And everybody who follows Jesus needs a Christian friend who will accept responsibility for them and will reach into their lives and phone them and text them and meet with them and do whatever it is that people do. And in terms of organizing the church, there needs to be an intentional design of scaffold to reach into everybody's life. Very few churches do that. I got many things that I want to say about how you can do that, how you can build it over time. But you've got to take an interest in the individuals. We've got to train up leaders by modeling. How do we model? Well, first of all, you got to spend time at it. If you're not spending 2 hours a week with 10 hours a week with individuals, not because you're trying to recruit them or convince them of something, but just because you're trying to help them down the road of life, answering their questions, throwing in your perspective on things. You need to build a variety of contexts. And come on, let's get out of here. Let's go walk down by the river or whatever. Maybe go out for lunch, but move from the systematic relationship with the person where you are friends together. And as they develop a friend, because you're going to inspire them to do so, that you don't let them say, well, bring them to me. You say, you go meet with them. And then if they ask a question and you're not sure about the answer, say, I may not be the best person to ask that, but let me work on that and I'll get back to you next time we get together. And then have them come and ask you, the guy asked me, what do you do with this problem in life? How do you respond to that? And then you can, in real time, move from the hands-on to hands-off so that you passed it on. So you've got to be the example. And then you got to debrief where people are going. There's so much more you can do in association. Exactly what Coleman said to do. Over 4 million copies of the book out there. But I don't think there's 4 million people out there that have said, I am going to do that. I'm going to adjust my life and I am going to get out on the street on Tuesday afternoons and I'm going to walk down Main Street and just talk to people. Or I'm going to phone up that new person that came to church and get together with them. Or I'm going to say to some deacon, will you come with me while I visit the nursing homes? Do it. Get out there. And you will, by association, make a huge difference in people's lives. Next week, we move on to the next chapter. And I don't know, maybe Green for Life isn't such a bad idea. Maybe you want to pick up on that. We'll catch you next time.